Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 6th of November. I'm Andrew Wilson, and thank you for joining me today for the Full Scottish. This afternoon I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 256 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our two guests for this afternoon, and then together we will look in a little more depth at the past week's key headlines from Scotland and around the world. Russian troops have been looting Kherson ahead of a potential withdrawal from the southeastern Ukrainian city. Items taken range from art and cultural exhibits to ambulances and tractors. There has been an assassination attempt on Alexander Nikulin, the judge who had previously sentenced two UK citizens to death in the Russian-controlled Donetsk region of Ukraine. Russian troops are allegedly searching for residents in Kherson region who are refusing to evacuate before the forces' potential withdrawal from the west bank of the Dnieper River. The Ukrainian Foreign Ministry has claimed its forces killed another 600 Russian soldiers in the past 24 hours. Iran's Foreign Minister, Hossein Amir-Abdollahian, has said that the country did supply Russia with drones, but that it took place before President Vladimir Putin's forces invaded Kyiv. The drones have been used in attacks on civilian infrastructure, notably targeting power stations and dams. President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed talk of limited Iranian supplies to Russia, saying Kyiv had downed 11 drones on Friday alone. Ukraine's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Oleg Nikolenko said Iran should realize that the consequences of the complicity in the crimes of Russian aggression against Ukraine will be much larger than the benefits of Russia's support. External power has been restored to Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant 2 days after it was disconnected from the power grid after Russian shelling damaged high-voltage lines, the UN nuclear watchdog has said. NATO's Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg has said he does not believe Russia will use a nuclear weapon in Ukraine. The 300,000 troops Putin conscripted as part of the mobilization drive are providing little additional offensive combat capability as the Russian military is struggling to train them, according to the UK's Ministry of Defence. Scheduled power cuts will take place in 7 Ukrainian provinces, including major cities such as Kyiv today. Other provinces affected are Kharkiv, Chernihiv, Cherkasy, Zhytomyr, Sumy and Poltava. About 500 power generators have been sent to Ukraine by 17 EU countries to help with the energy problems caused by Russian attacks. And at least 112,000 Russians have emigrated to Georgia this year, border crossing statistics show. Reports say that the first large wave of 43,000 arrived after Russia invaded Ukraine on the 24th of February, and the second wave came after Putin announced a nationwide mobilization drive in late September. Now, we are lucky enough to be joined today by two extra special guests. Firstly, Marion Fellows is the SNP MP for Hamilton and Wishaw. She spent almost 20 years teaching business studies at West Lothian College. She represented Wishaw as a local SNP councillor from 2012 to 2015, and Marion was elected to Westminster at the general election in 2015. She was re-elected for a second and third term in 2017 and 2019, respectively. Marion, good afternoon. How are you keeping?
Good afternoon, Andrew. I'm rare. I'm really fine. Sitting in Wishaw, enjoying the sunshine.
Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon on the Full Scottish, Marion. And Alice Taylor is an editor, journalist and commentator. Over the last decade and a half, Alice has lived and worked in the UK, Malta, Cyprus and Albania. She has a background in maritime law and legal marketing and now works as a journalist. Alice lives in Tirana, from where she joins us this afternoon. Alice, good afternoon. How are you?
Good afternoon. It's been a long week, but I'm good and I'm happy to be here.
Well, also, thank you for joining us from Tirana this afternoon, Alice. We greatly appreciate it.
Anytime.
Now, our first item, before we get into our first item this afternoon, commentary surrounding the current events that we see mainly taking place in Kent in the southeast of England have been reaching frankly embarrassing levels of hysteria. Added to that, many broadcast journalists seem to find it very difficult to understand or explain what is going on to a greater or lesser extent parroting the lazy and inaccurate tropes on the front pages of the UK's tabloid press. I'm thinking, for example, of BBC Kent's political reporter who says that the UK is, I quote, defending itself on the front line against migrants. So, on Broadcasting Scotland today, we will try to look a little more carefully and a little more thoughtfully at what is going on, and we will try very hard to describe what is going on in language which is appropriate and accurate. So, Marion, firstly, coming to you. Earlier on, I read an interview with an Iranian asylum seeker. He's been incarcerated in a hotel room in Reading for 17 months. He was a successful scientific academic in Iran. He has 2 university degrees, including a master's in astrophysics, and speaks 6 languages fluently, including English. Now, he has concluded that people don't seem to have a good opinion of asylum seekers from the Middle East. They read the press about the wars, about the poor. They seem to think people with our hair colour, our skin colour, are stupid. If you're a white European with blonde hair and blue eyes, then you're considered intelligent. And he went on to say, we need to be brave enough to consider that all of us are human. So, to start us off this afternoon, Marion, what do you think is at the root of the anti-immigration language and the hostile environment that we see on the front pages of the press, we see parroted on mainstream media, and that we see coming from the UK government?
I'm going to try and be moderate in my language here, Andrew, but I don't know how successful I'll be. I think at the root cause of all this is a little Englander motif that is being pressed by the UK government. I find it incredible that the government thinks it is okay to treat asylum seekers and migrants as others, the other migrants and asylum seekers. They make it almost impossible for them to get here by legal means, what they refer to as legal means, and they use that against people when they arrive in the UK. It's appallingly awful how these people are treated. For example, Marston and the recent place outside London near Heathrow, where I think it's actually all right to leave people cooped up, locked up 24 hours a day in the middle of power cuts. I can't understand why it's done. I really, truly, honestly have tried. Can't understand why they do it, except to provoke fear and misunderstanding across the board. I too have met an Iranian doctor who came here, and the man is intelligent, the man is bright, he could contribute so much if this government would stop its stupid policy of not allowing them to refugees and asylum seekers to work. It just doesn't make any sense.
Thanks, Marion. I couldn't agree more. And so Alice, to extrapolate the point that we were making with regard to this individual, but with regard to Iranians seeking refuge and asylum in the UK, to extrapolate that to people who come from somewhere else other than the Middle East, is it the same little Englander, the same othering, the same inexplicable misunderstanding, and the same right-wing hate? Which is at the root of the response from Westminster to people coming from other parts of the world.
Of course. I mean, look at what's happening with Albania. Albanians have become the latest in a long line of targets by these groups and the government. I mean, I can remember in my lifetime, it's been the Polish, the Bulgarians, the Romanians, the Muslims, the Afghans, and now it's the Albanians, because they were sort of running out of targets, I think, and they sort of came along. And it's really, I mean, this is not new. We see the same language and the same rhetoric used against different groups of people. And it's come at a time, yes, there are an increase in the numbers of Albanians coming to the UK, but it's also come at a time where the Conservative Party is the least popular party in the UK. They would likely lose an election if one was held tomorrow. They've been a laughingstock of Europe over the last couple of weeks because of all the disasters with the prime ministers and everything like this. And this is a way to distract. They know that there is a large percentage of their voter base who really love good anti-immigrant rhetoric, and a way to galvanize support and to get some improvement is to create this rhetoric of us versus them. We've got to fight these people away. And then when they do, they can call it a success, and everybody forgets about the catastrophic disaster, which is the Conservative Party at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, you go on, Marion.
I was going to say, I mean, immigration is falling. And that's something that what the crisis is in the Home Office and doing the processing of immigration applications. And it's throwing red meat to folk who have racist tendencies and to the right wing of the Tory party. And words defy me. We need, across the UK, we need more people, not fewer. And when we have well educated, well qualified people, we should be welcoming them, not making it even more difficult for them to come here.
No, that's a good
Can
point,
I just
Marion. Yes, of course, Alice.
I was just going to say, if this really was a real concern about people coming here and, taking jobs or whatever, they would be flying over to Albania immediately. They would be sorting out the issue. They'd be investing in it, but they're not. They're just spouting hatred, which demonstrates clearly this is for political reasons.
Yes.
Well, that absolutely, Alice. I was just about to say to Marion, when she was Home Secretary, Priti Patel alleged that because they are not fleeing war, most Albanian asylum seekers are either undeserving economic migrants or potential criminals. Patel, of course, who took a very hardline stance on all migrants, claimed that Albanians are leaving a prosperous country to take advantage of the UK's wealth and hospitality. Now, the reality is a little bit more sophisticated and complex than that. For example, I think from numbers I've seen, about half the population of Albania at the moment is at risk of poverty, and that's running at some of the highest levels in Europe according to EU data. And the wages paid in Albania are some of the lowest on the continent. And Albanians, of course, have been hit extra hard because of the global cost of living crisis, which we'll come on to, and rocketing food costs, because for many families in Albania, half of their income goes on food. And again, that's one of the highest proportions in Europe. So when she described Albania as a prosperous country and so mischaracterized Albanians, was Priti Patel badly informed, or was she deliberately misleading us all?
I think she was maybe a combination of the two. I would hazard a guess she probably didn't know where Albania was before all this sort of happened. Albania is not a prosperous country. It is very poor. It is, and I mean, you talk the minimum wage is 250 euros, but you have to understand that there are people living way, way below that. You have farmers whose income is sort of 70 euros or less a month. You have pensioners on 100 euros a month. You have this cost of living increase, but also the way the Albanian family unit is, that extended family will often live together. So you can have grandparents, parents, and children all in the same house, maybe an aunt and uncle. And the responsibility of supporting that family will often fall on the son of the house. So it is his responsibility to provide. And how can you provide on 300 euros, for example? I spoke to one chap recently, and the only option for work where he lives is working as a mechanic. He trained as it. He gets 250 euros a month, but he gets 2 days off a year. So he works 7 days a week. He gets 2 days off a year, no social security, nothing. And he has to provide for his family. So Priti Patel can bandy words like economic migrant around, but if your situation is so severe that you don't know how you can afford your family or buy the medicine your mum needs to keep her heart beating, another example from someone I interviewed, that whilst technically that is an economic migrant, for that young lad, that's life or death. And that is what is missing from this narrative as well.
Yeah. And
Absolutely,
also the
Alice.
fact,
Well,
sorry, Andrew, the fact that a lot of these migrants actually, they don't come here and they don't go on uh, benefits. They work and they send their money back home, and they work hard to keep themselves alive. And there's cases where, okay, people from Albania are coming a few times over and over, but they're doing it for the right reasons. And this is how Scotland was built. I mean, a lot of Scotland, and you can't go back 2 generations here without finding economic migrants, nor often from Ireland, who came here for a better life for their family. And they've done well, and the families are settled here, and that's all to the good of Scotland. It defies belief, this othering. It really, really does.
And a lot of these people leaving are educated as well.
Yes.
They are educated people. They're not just, they might have just finished their degree at the university, they can't get a job and they've gone.
Absolutely. Now, Alice, it's widely recognised by some that there are many valid reasons for Albanians to seek asylum. For example, there have been cases related to young men fleeing blood feuds, and now other issues have come to the fore: domestic violence of both women and children, women fleeing forced marriages, LGBT issues, and people becoming political targets. Some people seeking asylum have been police officers who refused to break the law and felt that they had to flee. Now, at the moment, it seems that when someone with Albanian papers presents themselves in Kent, they are immediately racially profiled by the Home Office, and if at all possible, they're put on a charter flight back to Tirana. Now, surely racial profiling, comparatively high-speed deportation, and no chance to seek legal advice or representation makes the proper lawful handling of all of these people more or less impossible.
Yes, absolutely. I have a friend who works, she's often called upon by the Home Office to give context on cases of asylum. And she said in the last month or so, it's completely dried up. There hasn't been a single request. So they are not processing applications in the correct way. Now, if you consider up to 53% of applications this year, you want to sit here? Up to 53% of applications filed so far this year have been approved by the British
Yep.
government. So you have to think, if they're stopping to do this now, what impact is that going to have on people who are fleeing very horrific circumstances? You have women and men as well, that have been trafficked into slave labor or sex trafficking, and then they're being sent back or refused asylum, etc. Once they get back to Albania, like women especially, they can't go back to their families. Their families will have nothing to do with them, because it's brought a shame on the family. So they will end up, destitute, and they're actually at a risk of being re-trafficked as well. So by sending people home, the government is actually risking people's lives in a percentage of cases.
If these people who are being trafficked, if they have incurred significant debts and are now back in Albania, one can imagine the extremely difficult and threatening position that they will find themselves in. And also, to your point, Alice, of the asylum claims that are rejected by the Home Office, 50% of those rejections are overturned on appeal, if you can get to an appeal. But Marion, arguably the Home Office approach is getting even worse. There are reports in the media this weekend that the Home Office is hiring asylum decision makers from customer service and sales positions at McDonald's, Tesco and Aldi as part of a recruitment drive to clear its huge backlog of asylum applications. Now, I have nothing against people who work in customer service in any organisation, including the three I just mentioned. However, this is part of a recruitment drive, and the new recruits hired through online advertising and high street recruitment agencies have no prior experience or knowledge of the asylum system. Many are placed on rolling temporary contracts, typically for 3 months, and despite being promised comprehensive training, the reports are that decision makers are left to fend for themselves after 2 days shadowing another officer. And then they have to conduct the complex interviews and make, as Alice says, life or death decisions. So does this give us insight into how badly the Home Office is organised, or their determination to do everything on the cheap, and perhaps how the immigration system is going to get a great deal worse before it begins to get fixed?
Yeah, because there's a backlog, which is denied by the government, but there is a backlog of applications. The recruitment process you've described, Andrew, just isn't fit for purpose, because actually it's creating almost even more backlog, because after 2 days training and not doing the interviews properly according to Home Office procedures, that's slowing things down even more. There needs to be a concerted effort by this government to really, it's not about dealing with boats in the channel that's the real issue. It's dealing with the backlog of applications and keeping people in improper circumstances like Marston and some of the detention centres. How can you actually argue that it's all the focal folk coming across the channel in small boats. When you the government herds them into camps where diphtheria is running riot, where there are power cuts, where people are being kept for months rather than hours or even a couple of days. That's the real issue. The Home Office need to get back on track and do exactly what they should be doing. And can I say that I have nothing but empathy and regard for Home Office staff who are working under extremely difficult conditions. And I got to know some of them when there was the Home Office hub in Parliament. And I got accused by a Tory MP of saying that staff weren't working hard enough. That is not generally the case. The case is that there's just so much work that they can't get through it. And when they start with recruiting in the way you've described, Andrew, it just makes matters worse instead of better.
I think that's certainly the risk, Marion. Thank you. But let's move on a little bit now. And I'm assured that it's not because today is the anniversary of the Suez Crisis that our next item is about the sun finally setting on the empire as the sunlit uplands of the promised Brexit disappear. And so we're going to move from A for asylum. Let's move on to B for Brexit. Marion, firstly with you, have you recently been able to identify or quantify any benefits of Brexit?
Would you be surprised if I said no, Andrew? I mean, there are companies all over the UK, Scotland, the rest of the UK, which are really finding the difficulties of Brexit just impossible now to deal with. And with the cost of living crisis as well, it's really, and the energy costs, businesses are really suffering. But at the heart of a lot of the issues in Scotland and in the rest of the UK is the end to free travel, is the end of not just free travel, but actually being easily able to export into Europe. And the government refused to see that. There are still a huge chunk of the party, the Conservative Party at Westminster, who are moving further and further to the right and who actually believe their own propaganda about how sunny uplands and all the benefits of Brexit, refusing to understand that it's been a disaster for the UK to move out of Europe, and also a disaster for Northern Ireland, because of the problems with the DUP and the problems of getting the Northern Ireland Assembly back up and running. And that's directly linked to Brexit.
Completely, Marion. Thank you. Now, Alice, you perhaps have a twin perspective from Cornwall, where you've got background, and from Tirana, where you are just now, and other countries and cities where you've lived and worked. So I was going to ask you, I apologise, a very broad question, but you can take the answer wherever you like. Why would a relatively stable democracy, as the UK was before 2016, why would it believe the propaganda, or why would it do to itself what it's done with Brexit?
It's like, I genuinely don't think when the referendum was called, I don't think anybody really predicted it was going to go this way, least of all David Cameron. I think it was a gamble that completely backfired. But I also believe that there was interference in the campaign towards, around Brexit, etc. And I think that it was not a fair fight, so to speak. But I'm half Welsh. I grew up in Cornwall, where there are sort of independence movements as well, and I support them now, considering the mess that the UK is in. I mean, my mum would be the right person to ask about this. She's absolutely furious. And I mean, it doesn't impact me now because I live outside of the EU. But I mean, even going into the EU when I'm traveling, people at customs actually laugh at my passport. Where you have the two lanes, one for EU citizens and one for non-EU, like they always make jokes. And I just feel it was, no one really expected this to actually happen. And now it's actually happened. People have just gone, oh God, what do we do now? How do we try and make this look as least atrocious as possible? That's my view from looking in. It's everything now is just damage control. And they don't really want to admit that it's been a complete disaster. So it's just sort of denying, no, it's not that bad, it's not that bad, and that's it.
And one of the difficulties, sorry, Andrew, one of the difficulties is that Labour are now saying, well, that's it. Keir Starmer was on TV this morning talking about renegotiating a deal, but Brexit's done and we just need to get a better deal. That's not going to happen. I mean, how do I know? Well, I can't say with definitive certainty, but Europe have already made it reasonably clear that, you've had your Brexit, get on with it. So you've got the two major parties now almost going down this rabbit hole of saying, oh, it'll be fine, it'll eventually get better, when actually it probably won't.
Well, Marion, that's a good point. You anticipated a question I've got for you, which is that one thing we do know is that Labour's current position is summed up by the trite, and some might say meaningless, make Brexit work. There's next to no meaningful detail around what that's supposed to mean. And now, in addition, it's pretty clear that the various warring tribes which comprise the Tory party also can't agree what Brexit really is or how to get it done. So
Yeah.
is there a serious problem here? Neither of the main Westminster parties know what to do about Brexit, let alone have any plan to do something about it.
Absolutely. And the infighting in the Tory party is just, it's not going to get us anywhere. And the the government is a joke. It's a joke here as well as abroad. They keep U-turning, they keep changing their minds, keep changing prime minister. Uh, there doesn't even seem to be a cohesive policy, and all of what the government's doing presently is to pacify their backbenchers, either the Eurosceptics or the Europhiles. And that's no way to run a country, especially in a time of global crisis and the war in Ukraine and global energy prices. They're too busy concentrating and placating their own backbenches at the moment. And Labour will say and do almost anything to get themselves elected. And the only way they can really get themselves elected is to move further to the right as well. Appeal to Middle England and hope they get in that way.
It's depressing, isn't it, Marion? Now, Alice, you mentioned a moment ago. Alice, you mentioned a moment ago about travelling, and I was going to ask you about that because significant and continued disruption for a very long time was the gloomy scenario set out last month by Doug Bannister, who's the chief exec of the Port of Dover. Now, as the boss of the main surface access point between the UK and continental Europe, he was warning of the consequences of the new EU exit entry system to which the UK has asked to become subject. So what happens is that probably from next May, every departing British passport holder at Dover will have their fingerprints and facial biometrics taken. Now, that's probably about 10 minutes for a family of four in a car, compared to about 90 seconds at the moment, if there's not a big queue. And it struck me that Kent will quickly become gridlocked in both directions, already with people arriving in Kent across the Channel, but now people trying to leave Kent to get to Europe. So when this finally dawns on travellers who've got UK passports, Alice, do you think there will be any pushback when people really begin to see how disadvantaged Brexit has made them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once people really start to see the consequences of this and the fact that Europe is not going to sort of bend over to for concessions for the UK, it's really going to hit home. I mean, we saw it when all those people who are living in Europe who are British passport holders, there were a lot in Cyprus, there were a lot in Spain of a certain demographic who supported Brexit, voted for Brexit while living in the EU, and then complained that they had to go through a really lengthy residence procedure to remain living in their EU country. And I just found that really, really bizarre. And also, I mean, I may go as far as to say people will feel it this winter, because with the rising prices, rising costs, energy issues, etc., any help doled out by the EU is not going to go to the UK. They're going to miss out on that as well. Any future energy deals or whether the EU is going to be buying fuel together as a bloc, all these possible future scenarios, the UK is just not going to have a part of. And British people are going to feel that and they're going to complain about it. And the Remainers are going to say, well, we did try to warn you.
Yeah.
Absolutely, Alice. Thank you. As you might imagine, our hearts go out to Brits living in the Costa Brava who are now having to reset their driving tests in Spanish. But let's move on now, because we're being warned of difficult decisions and told that this is a global recession. But can the poorest survive austerity 2.0, and how are other countries dealing with the rise in energy costs? So, with apologies, there's an alphabetical theme developing here today. We're now at C for cost of living crisis. So, Marion, on Friday, I had the temerity to tweet a graph from the Bank of England's economic assessment, which showed very clearly the difference between the cost of borrowing in the rest of the world and the cost of borrowing in the UK. And it was very clear where the responsibility for that difference lay as a result of the ill-described mini-budget from a few weeks ago. So that suggests to me that aspect of the cost of living crisis, the cost of borrowing, is pretty UK specific and is not a global issue.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things, and everything is blamed on global. Putin gets a lot of the blame, and yes, of course, there are issues over the war in Ukraine that are increasing cost of living, and it will only get worse when the next year's harvest doesn't appear. It's a willful disregard of what's going on and taking responsibility for what previous and current governments, Conservative governments in the UK have done. And it's really willful in as much as they don't believe the bad publicity they have generated by themselves. And they don't really understand that that's why it costs more to borrow. And they don't really understand that the rest of the world is laughing at them. And I've heard that from various sources, not just you, Alice.
Thanks, Marion. And just as we've got the benefit of your parliamentary experience here this afternoon on Broadcasting Scotland, you've seen Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng operating in the House and operating around Westminster, and you've seen the people who surround them and have been involved with them. And so I was keen to hear your reflections on why perhaps you think it is, and my apologies for trying to put you inside the mind of Liz Truss or Kwasi Kwarteng. That's not what I'm trying to do here. But why do you think it was that they felt that such a economic experiment, such a huge gamble as you described it, why that was ever going to work?
Andrew, in spite of my 7 years in Westminster, I have no idea. I absolutely have no idea. I sat there in the chamber and listened to Kwasi Kwarteng in disbelief. A lot of his backbench, the backbench in the Tory party did believe it. So the majority of people in the House that day just sat there with their mouths open, not quite believing what was happening, and the absolute inability of. Of course, they eventually blamed Chris Philp, who was in the Treasury with them. It was obvious, I think, or maybe I'm just being a bit naive. I thought it was pretty obvious that Liz Truss wasn't really a choice. And I've spoken to Tory MPs who voted for her, who said, well, we thought she might be okay. Okay isn't what we need at this point. We need much, much better than okay. Now they've taken Rishi Sunak on board, but he's teetering on the edge of trying to placate the backbenches again. So that's why he's taken on board folk like Gavin Williamson, and Penny Mordaunt's still unhappy, and Jacob Rees-Mogg will cause mischief on the backbenches. All of this is not about what's best for the UK, it's what's best for the Tory party. And nobody can really get a handle because they are so divided between Remainers, Brexiteers, right wing, left wing, folk that actually have a social conscience, and those who think, well, if you don't like it here, get back in a boat. It's it's dysfunctional, and it's about the Tory party. And what is even, I suppose, in my case, more worrying is that Labour are slipping back. Labour are now slipping back in points for the next election, and you think, Yeah, we need out of there. There's no good place for Scotland to be under a UK government at the moment, I think. And the argument that we're hearing from folk like Keir Starmer today, which is, it's a cost of living crisis, we can't possibly be looking at independence, actually, I think it's entirely the wrong way around. But, you would expect me to say that, but I've never felt more strongly about it.
Yes, without giving the game away completely, Marion, as was pointed out, I think, yesterday, without the broad shoulders of the Union, we'd be as poor as Norway. But let's move on. Alice, thinking about another aspect of the cost of living crisis, the approach of the UK government has been to agree to make a very small contribution to the cost of paying some people's bills and to make it plain that the taxpayer will pay for that small contribution. So far, so inadequate. So, Alice, can you think of any other examples of how other countries are approaching the energy cost crisis, which is widespread? I'm thinking of the approach in Albania or in other countries that you're aware of.
Well, Albania is, at the moment, the cost of energy is subsidized by the government. So the government is covering everything. We are paying the same as we were sort of 2 years ago, essentially. So that's how the government is doing it. What they're thinking of doing, though, is anyone who spends over 800, anyone who uses over 800 kilowatts, megawatts, 800 a month, over a certain band, they will pay the market rate for those units. So it's an idea to get people to keep their bills a certain level, not to overuse, to cut back, and then if you do that, you will pay a good, the normal amount. If you exceed that, you pay the market rate. And I think that is fair. But also what we've seen in other countries as well is talk of windfall taxes, which may be slightly controversial, but I agree with. I think companies that are making profit at this time should be paying back more over what they would profit normally, because they're profiting from people's poverty, essentially. So this is what I think. I think, introducing bans like this could be one solution, but I think windfall taxes are another solution we need to look at, because why should these companies be making additional profit while people are struggling to put food on the table?
Completely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Alice. Now, Marion, and to bring it back to the domestic situation, to bring it back to reality a little bit, what are you able to share with us a little bit of the flavour of what you're seeing from your constituents in your casework now as a
Yes.
result of the cost of living crisis, only
Yes,
as winter is beginning here?
yes, and that's the real worry. I've had an increase in caseload for people looking for help, and also something as basic as being able to get in touch with energy companies, because they are completely overwhelmed by the amount of calls and texts and emails they're getting. The approach of the government also, when Rishi Sunak came in and cut the idea of help beyond 6 months, and we're still, obviously waiting for the autumn statement, as it's now being referred to. It just there doesn't seem to be a coherent or even sensible way forward. And it's all about, all the stuff that's coming out from the government is about cutting welfare. Rishi Sunak won't agree to hasn't confirmed that they'll uprate benefits in line with inflation. All of that sort of thing is really causing people extreme worry. Whereas in, say, France, EDF's a French government-owned energy company, and we're relying on government-owned companies in this country, other government-owned countries, other countries-owned energy companies, to help us and to help our people pay less, and that's just nuts. It's just absolutely nuts. I have real concerns in my role as disability spokesperson, because there's not enough help being given to people with disabilities and people like me. And I'm very fortunate. I've had my winter fuel payment increased by £300. Now, I do believe in universality of things like that. but there has to be some mechanism where someone like me can officially say, no, I don't need this, give it to someone else, rather than, I will do other things with that. But it's not fairly distributed, any help that's being given, and that's a real worry, because my constituency in particular isn't a wealthy one. I mean, there are pockets of people in the constituency, but overall we have very high areas of deprivation, and people are really, really worried. And you're now getting to the state where people are using food banks but can't actually heat, don't have the wherewithal, or find it really difficult to heat the food they're being given. And this is 2022 in one of the richest countries on earth. Where have we gone wrong? And that's another story. That's an absolute other story.
That would be a whole other program, Marion. You're absolutely right.
Oh,
Thank you.
absolutely.
But Alice, one final question in this topic from the perspective of Albania, perhaps. Now, do people in Albania, where the majority, I think you said, of electricity is hydroelectric, and people in Scotland, where so much of our energy, of our electricity, is wind generated, do people share the same confusion about the jump in the price of their electricity because the price of wind and the price of water have not gone up?
So what's happening here? So yeah, you're right. Nearly 100% of our electricity is generated by hydropower, but the majority of that comes in the spring and the summer as the snow melts, and then some in the autumn as well. But there is a problem. The Albanian government companies here, they can't store the electricity once it's generated. So anything that's not used sort of at that time is exported and sold. So in periods where there is a low generation of energy from the hydropower. Okay, babe. That means that they have to buy the energy back from another country, and that's usually fossil fuel. What do you need, darling? No, babe, that's okay. So they have to buy it back from another country, which means they have to buy it at the market rates. So that's what's happening here. But there is another issue to do with global warming and climate change. So this year we've seen a significant decrease in rainfall. We've seen a significant decrease in rainfall, which has meant the dams are not functioning as well. There is not as much electricity being generated, and that's where the issue of prices comes from.
Yeah. That's some great perspective. Thank you, Alice. That's really helpful in increasing our understanding of the way of both of those aspects of where we all are. But let's move on to our next item here, and you'll be delighted to hear I've stopped with the alphabet now. So next week, Scotland's First Minister will be attending COP27, and our Environment Minister, Mary McCallan, will be representing Scotland in the subsequent week. Meanwhile, Rishi Sunak has had to be shamed into going to Sharm el-Sheikh at the same time as the UN Secretary General warns we will be doomed without a historic climate pact. So, Marion, firstly with you, is this latest U-turn, I think it's the third Sunak U-turn in 8 days, he reversed the his intention to permit fracking again, and then he's reversed on the way he's going to handle EU retained law. Mm-hmm. But does this latest third U-turn from Sunak, does it give us any indication that Downing Street just really doesn't seem to know what it's doing?
Well, yes, I think so, because not only that, I mean, he's U-turned and he's now going, and he should have been going right from the day he became Prime Minister. He's also dismissed Alok Sharma as past president of COP26 in Glasgow, someone who really knew what he was doing and would have been much more effective if he was still going. And he's downgraded the post of climate minister, and they no longer sit in the cabinet. And what it's really sending out is signals that he doesn't entirely take the whole thing seriously. And that's really worrying. That is absolutely really worrying, because we need, I mean, as you said in your introduction, Andrew, UN are saying, we're running out of time on this. We really need to be serious and be a world leader in this. And that's not what's happening with this government. And it's all the wrong signals are being sent out to folk who are attending COP27 now as a result.
Well, absolutely, Marion. I think it's fair. I think it would be fair to say that as Chancellor, Mr. Sunak was never seen as someone without much of a commitment to the net zero agenda, and this U-turn probably reinforces that view. But I was going to follow up with you very quickly, having looked at the political position for Mr. Sunak. In contrast, does the approach taken by Ms. Sturgeon indicate that, at least in terms of her political understanding, and if I can say put it in these terms, her political senses or political sensibility, that perhaps in contrast to Downing Street, she perhaps seems to know what she's doing?
Yes, and certainly Scotland has been world leading in some of the policies on towards net zero, and it's always been a case of, well, we can do what we like. It's back to this UK governments, succeeding UK governments since about 2010, think that they're world leading, but they're out of step with the rest of the world. And that is something that is just, the divide is getting bigger in all sorts of areas. But I think also in terms of global warming, in terms of net zero, I think they're missing the boat, and it's really quite worrying. The thought that one Prime Minister thought it might be okay to go back to fracking, and that opening up further oil fields and opening up a coal mine in Cumbria, all of this is a retrograde step, and it's really, really sending out the wrong signals.
Thanks, Marion. Now, Alice, to come back to you, and I'll give you another broad question for which I apologise. COP27, 40,000 delegates visiting a country with a reported 60,000 political prisoners, and a global climate summit being held at the Lamborghini Conference Centre. No, I'm not making it up. So this strikes me as perhaps a slightly unlikely backdrop for humanity to save itself from itself. So what do you think we're going to see over the next 2 weeks from Sharm el-Sheikh?
Me? Sorry?
No,
Yeah.
sorry, Alice. Yes, for you. Sorry, Alice.
Oh, yeah. So my connection dropped out for a moment. I just want to say something. We're talking about this energy crisis that we've found ourselves in, and people are suffering sort of all over. And I can't help but think, if maybe the politicians had listened, all around Europe had listened to the warnings a long time ago to do with renewable energy and diversifying sources, maybe we wouldn't have found ourselves in this situation now. And the fact that the British government doesn't appear to be taking it too seriously, and in fact, I would say most governments are really not taking it too seriously and are looking at going back to fossil fuels and fracking and God knows what else, it just shows how out of step they are. And I really don't think they take this situation seriously at all. They're not acknowledging the fact, like I mentioned in Albania, that we're going to run out of hydropower opportunities soon because of global warming. They are still building hydropower plants. I don't think they take it seriously. And I think this comes back to something we talked about earlier, which is the fact that governments, politicians, they do not see any further than the ends of how long they think their time in power is going to last. They are predominantly focused on their own political issues. As you mentioned, they just care about what's going on inside the Tory party, etc. They don't look at the bigger picture. They don't look ahead. They don't look at setting a foundation for whoever comes next. It's all about their own sort of power. And this has huge ramifications from immigration, as we've discussed, to climate and energy and economic crisis, as we're seeing now. So do I think anything's going to come out of Sharm el-Sheikh? No, there will be a lot of hot air, unfortunately, which is not what we need at the moment.
Completely, Alice. Thank you. And Marion, just to come back to the more domestic politics for a moment, normally when thinking about what happened last week in Sunak's U-turn, normally when a Prime Minister has news to unveil on a Wednesday, they save it up for Prime Minister's questions. In terms of presentation and announcement that PMQs can wrongfoot the opposition and secure a headline. But Mr. Sunak chose to announce that he would be going to COP27 2 hours before PMQs. Now, firstly, it struck me that this is not an announcement that reflects well on him, as we've been discussing, because it's yet another reversal of what he said he would do, and he ended up looking like someone bounced into attending an event that he doesn't want to go to. And as
Yeah.
we said, as a chancellor, he didn't have much commitment to net zero. Uh, and all the second aspect is that, of course, that Boris Johnson had just confirmed that he would be attending, and so Sunak is now open to the charge of dancing to Boris Johnson's tune. Marion, can you imagine being shamed into action by Boris Johnson?
No. But that's the dysfunctionality of this particular Conservative government. I don't know who's advising uh, Rishi Sunak, but they're not doing a terribly good job. And Labour are moving into that space now. I mean, I heard Keir Starmer this morning assuring me I'd get a fairer, greener Scotland if Labour were in power. And I thought, well, that's a bit of a cheat, really, as you haven't been doing very much on that. And First Minister has a great track record on green energy and net zero. So, we can manage without, but that is something that Labour can see to differentiate themselves. And that, in a way, is disingenuous, but could be useful overall if Labour were to get in power. You might get a government that maybe believes in it, or maybe it is just political expediency. I can't make a definitive answer on that at the moment.
I think what I'm hearing from both of you is that governments, at least at the moment, are incredibly short term in their perspective,
Yes.
be it what the next day's headlines are or what's going to happen whilst they're in office. So I think there's definitely a link there. But let's move on to our final item now, because there's no doubt that Twitter as a company and as a community is in flux. So far, Elon Musk has already fired top executives, dissolved the board, flirted with adding additional paid tiers of service. He's seen major brands pause their advertising spend on the platform. He's tasked the remaining employees who haven't been sacked with finding ways to make the company more money. And it could be said that he's spread his own fair share of misinformation this week in particular. So, Alice, firstly with you, how do we get the Twitter platform, a platform that in many ways has sort of seen itself up until now as having a social mission to be a place where people can have conversations and get information, and a platform that some would say was a fundamental place for organising protests like the Arab Spring over a decade ago? How do we get that platform to move forward, Alice, especially with Elon Musk now in control?
This is something I'm quite conflicted about because, I'm really not sure where we draw the line, because Twitter is a private company and it is a business. And Elon Musk, for his faults, he is a businessman. However, and for that reason, in one way, I feel that they should be able to do what they want within certain parameters. However, as you mentioned, Twitter is more than just a private business. It's a way of sharing news, galvanizing social movements. And with that comes certain responsibilities, which I don't think apply to other kinds of private businesses. So it's very difficult to know where we draw the line, between what we can demand of a private business, what we expect of a private business, or sort of what the alternatives are. I think it's too early to really say or judge exactly how things are going to pan out, because Twitter certainly wasn't sort of a utopia before Elon Musk took over. It was rampant with hate speech, rampant with, I had death threats, rampant with trolls, with bots. There were lots of problems in, you would report things to Twitter and they'd say, no, that's fine, but then you might use a mild swear word and you get a telling off from them. So there were very big issues before. Obviously, I don't agree with the mass firing of staff, etc., the way this has been done. I believe there's been a lawsuit filed already about this in the US. But I just feel I need to wait and see a bit more how it's going to pan out, because it is a private business. This is sort of uncharted territory in a way. We haven't seen a social media company be sort of taken over in this way before. So it is all new. But I think in the end, we have to vote with our feet, so to speak, if things take a turn for the worse. yeah, I don't know is the answer to all the questions to do with Twitter. But
Well,
I'm nervous
that,
because I use Twitter professionally. It's very important to work as a journalist, working for a media portal. So I am concerned how this may or may not impact my work in the future.
Yeah.
that was what I had in mind, Alice. In 15 seconds, is it too early, or are you thinking of leaving the Twitter platform now?
No. I don't have another alternative at the moment. I'll hang on until if it becomes impossible, untenable, then I would leave and hope there is another solution. But I've lived through pretty bad experiences on Twitter already, so let's see. If he starts charging me for using it, I wouldn't charge, but I wouldn't pay. But let's see.
Yeah.
Understood. Thanks, Alice. And Marion, Twitter has 206 million daily active users, I think, about 38 million of whom are in the US. So 2 questions for you, again, briefly. With only 206 million daily active users, does Twitter really matter to voters and other people who don't inhabit the political and media bubble? And also the same question as I posed to Alice, are you thinking of leaving Twitter, or is it too soon?
Well, it's too soon to make a decision on leaving, but like Alice, I wouldn't be happy paying the kind of things he's asking for. I use Twitter as an information device. I make very little comment, or I put up videos of me performing in Westminster, that sort of thing. I think that uh, there may well be, and I know there are other platforms out there that are used by other people. And I think if Elon Musk isn't careful, he could end up with a huge turkey on his hands. And look what happened when Facebook was bought over and then was resold for much, much. I don't think there is actually, there always seems to be, for business people, a potential to make money. But the fact that advertisers are already holding back on Twitter could lead to serious trouble, and he may just have made his worst mistake. Who knows? That's a
Thanks,
statement after.
Marion. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm afraid
Yeah.
that's all that we've got time for this afternoon. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes, to continue to develop the station and to make new programmes for you. If you would like to support us, then please consider subscribing or donating to Broadcasting Scotland. You'll find the link to do that on the screen now. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new supporters to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who's signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much indeed. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot. You can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. And when you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Meantime, we will be here again tomorrow evening with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please tune in and join us again then. I hope that you've enjoyed a tasty, full Scottish this afternoon. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has been watching, and a very special thanks to our very special guests, Marion Fellows MP and Alice Taylor. Thank you both. In fact, thanks to all 3 of our contributors this afternoon, 2 in Tirana.
Thank you very much. There's a cat
Thank
lurking
you.
on either side of me as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for joining us on Broadcasting Scotland today. I hope that everybody has a very peaceful Sunday and can join us again here on Broadcasting Scotland very soon. Bye-bye.